I never expected my first home to be anything more than a quiet place to settle after years of renting. I was 29, single, and working full-time as a medical billing coordinator. After saving every spare dollar for nearly 6 years and living off the cheapest possible rent, I finally had enough to put a down payment on a modest 2-bedroom house in a small suburb outside of Chattanooga, Tennessee. It wasn't glamorous, faded siding, overgrown hedges, a roof that needed patching, but it was mine. My parents came down from Kentucky the weekend I moved in, helped me unload the U-Haul, stocked my fridge, and then drove back. That Sunday night, I stood in my empty living room with a half-unpacked box of dishes on the floor and a frozen pizza in the oven, thinking, this is it. This is home. Over the next week, I took time off work to settle in. I met a few neighbors, most of them older. There was Mrs. Harlow directly next door, a widow who insisted I take some banana bread she made that morning. Then there was Caleb and Trish, a younger couple across the street with a baby girl who they took on stroller walks every morning. They invited me to a backyard cookout the first Saturday after I moved in. Everyone seemed friendly in that, we'll wave and smile but won't pry kind of way. It was comforting, except for the house at the end of the block. It was different. Peeling paint, newspapers piling up on the porch, a missing section of gutter hanging like a broken arm. I assumed it was abandoned, or maybe just owned by someone who didn't care. That's what I thought, until I saw someone come out of it. It was about 9:30 one night during my first week when I heard a knock on my door. Not a ding-dong, just a few slow, spaced-out thuds. I hesitated. I hadn't invited anyone. I peeked out the peephole and saw a man, mid-50s maybe, bald up top but with a scruffy gray beard and worn-out flannel. He was hunched slightly, like someone who'd spent years doing hard physical labor. He smiled when he noticed me at the door. "Hey there," he said. "Sorry to bug you so late. Name's Carl. I live just down at the end. You're new here, huh?" I opened the door halfway, careful to keep my hand on the edge. "Yeah," I said cautiously. "Just moved in last week." He nodded. "Welcome. Place used to be owned by a woman named Peggy. Died about 2 years ago. It's good to see it occupied again." I said thanks and started inching the door closed, but he held up a hand. "Look, I hate to ask, but I'm in a bit of a bind. Water got shut off earlier today. You think you could fill this for me?" He held up a big blue bucket, the kind you'd use for mopping floors. It was an odd request, but he seemed harmless, and I'd been raised not to turn away a neighbor in need. "Sure," I said, taking the bucket. "Just give me a second." After filling it in the bathtub, I lugged it back, handed it over, and he thanked me. That was the end of it, for then. But over the next few nights, it became a pattern. One night, he asked if I had any extra canned food. Another, he said his flashlight batteries died and asked for spares. Once, at 11:45 p.m., he knocked and asked if I had any bandages because he'd cut his hand on a fence nail. Every time I noticed he looked more unkempt. Dirt under the nails, shadows under his eyes, clothes that hadn't been washed. Something about him started to unsettle me. Not so much what he asked for, but how comfortable he seemed showing up like that. I started making excuses, telling him I was out, that I didn't have what he needed. Eventually, I stopped answering the door altogether, but he didn't stop knocking. Sometimes it'd be 10 p.m., sometimes closer to 1 a.m. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, always spaced exactly the same. I thought about telling someone, but what would I even say? A neighbor asked for water and canned food and now he's knocking too much? It came to a head on a Wednesday night. It was nearly midnight when I heard it, those same 3 knocks. I groaned, walked to the peephole and almost ignored it. But then I saw his face. He looked panicked. His eyes were wide, and he was breathing hard like he'd been running. Despite the unease in my gut, I opened the door, just a crack. "Carl?" He looked over his shoulder, then back at me. "Sorry. Look, sorry," he said quickly. "I just got this new propane grill, right? But I think I hooked it up wrong and I smell gas. Can you help me check it? I just need someone to tell me if it smells weird. I blinked. You want me to come to your house right now? I wouldn't ask, but I really don't want to blow the place up or something. Just come take a quick look. I don't trust my own nose anymore. I stood there, processing. Everything inside me screamed no, but I had this weird mix of guilt and concern. What if there really was a gas leak? I told him I'd be over in a minute and went back inside to put on shoes. I grabbed my phone too, just in case. Carl lived at the very end of the block. His front yard was littered with broken lawn chairs and a rusted-out grill. His front door was wide open, but no lights were on. Out back, he called from inside. It's in the yard. I stepped cautiously through the gate into his backyard. There was no grill, no propane tank, just a patch of dirt and an overturned wheelbarrow. Carl, I called. Yeah, I'm down here, he answered, from inside the house. I moved it into the basement, wanted to keep it safe. Come help me carry it back up? Basement. The word made my stomach tighten. I stepped closer to the back door. Inside, it was pitch black, not a single light on. You got a light in there? I asked. Nah, switch broke a while ago. Just come on, I'm right down here. I didn't move. My heartbeat thudded against my ribs. Carl, I think I'm gonna head back. I'll call someone to come check it if you think it's dangerous. Silence. Then, thump, thump, thump. Sudden sprinting footsteps up the stairs inside the house. I bolted, full sprint back down the path, out the gate, down the street. I didn't even look back. I got inside my house, locked both the front and back doors and grabbed a knife from the kitchen. I watched from the window for half an hour. Nothing. Not a single movement. I didn't sleep. I considered calling the police, but I didn't know what I'd say. My neighbor invited me into his dark house and ran at me from the basement. The next few days passed without incident. No knocks. No sign of Carl. Finally, I brought it up with Mrs. Harlow, the widow next door. I mentioned the man at the end of the street, Carl, and her face scrunched with confusion. Carl, she said. Sweetheart, nobody lives in that house. It's been empty since old Pete died 2 years ago. I stood there, heart pounding, my mind reeling. No, I said slowly. I've talked to someone. He said he lives there. She shook her head. Honey, that place doesn't even have electricity or running water. Someone must have been squatting maybe. But I haven't seen anyone. I walk my dog twice a day right past there. I told her what happened. She called the police. When they searched the house, they found nothing. No bed, no clothes, no food, no grill, no signs of anyone living there recently. The back door was still open. They did find scratch marks on the basement walls. Deep ones. I moved out 2 weeks later. I don't know who that man was. I don't know what was really in that basement. But sometimes, when I can't sleep, I still think about those 3 slow knocks. And I wonder, how long had he been watching my house before he ever knocked the first time? I was desperate. That's really where this all begins. When you're cornered, out of money, out of options, and running on the kind of hope that makes you ignore red flags just because they're the only thing flapping in the wind. It was the summer before my sophomore year in college, and I had just lost the student housing lottery. I was back in my hometown, a tiny Midwestern place called Deerfield, pretty in the fall, brutally hot in the summer, and trying to figure out where I'd live once classes started again. My school, Emerson Valley University, didn't allow second years to stay in dorms unless you had a medical exemption. I didn't, so I needed an apartment. The problem was Emerson Valley's off-campus housing was a nightmare, either falling apart or stupidly expensive. I had enough money saved from working at the movie theater the past year to put down a deposit, but rent? No way I could swing it alone. So I did what any broke, mildly optimistic 19-year-old would do. I posted an ad in the Emerson Classifieds and Craigslist, looking for a roommate ASAP. Quiet, responsible student looking for someone to split rent on a 2-bedroom within walking distance of campus. I'm clean, non-smoker, respectful, and serious about school. Message if interested. Nothing fancy, just honest. I posted it at 9:23 p.m. and went to make instant noodles. At 10:01 p.m., I had one response. Her name was Elaine Barrett. She wrote in short, polite sentences, said she was recently retired and needed a smaller place after losing her husband the year before. I paused at her age. She said she was 71, but then reread her message. She sounded kind. She was willing to pay half the rent without hesitation, said she liked students, liked the quiet, and wouldn't be a bother. I didn't get any other responses that week. By the time September rolled around, we'd signed a lease for a little brick duplex 5 blocks from campus. It was older, creaky floors, yellowed blinds, but clean and quiet. There was a small front porch and a big oak tree out front that shaded the living room windows. Elaine was small, maybe 5'1", thin but not frail, white hair in a tight bun. She always wore long skirts and cardigans, even in the heat. Her voice was soft, and she smelled like lavender soap. We moved in on the same day. I remember because she brought over a single box and a suitcase, said she didn't believe in clutter. She picked the smaller room in the back of the house and told me I could have the one with the bay window. She said she didn't watch TV and would mostly stay in her room reading or doing her puzzles. Honestly, she was the dream roommate. For the first few weeks, I barely saw her. I'd come home from class, make dinner, and maybe hear her walk to the bathroom or refill her kettle. Every once in a while, she'd come into the kitchen while I was there and say something pleasant like, "Long day?" or "Smells good." She was always polite, always soft-spoken, but then things started to shift. The first thing I noticed was the laughter. It started one night while I was sitting on the living room floor working on a paper. I heard a faint giggle, high-pitched, almost girlish, coming from her room. I smiled at first, assuming she was on the phone with a friend, but it went on for a weirdly long time. No conversation, no other voice, just these soft, sharp bursts of giggling, like she was watching something no one else could see. The next few nights it happened again. I'd be doing homework or watching something quietly, and through the wall, giggling. Always just the one sound, no murmurs, no words, just that laughter. It made my skin crawl a little, like something was off but not quite wrong enough to bring it up. The second thing was her staring. I started to catch her watching me. She'd stand just inside the hallway that led to her room, half shrouded in shadow, hands clasped loosely in front of her stomach, just watching. I'd glance up from the couch and there she'd be, silent, unmoving, staring with a small, vague smile that didn't reach her eyes. At first I thought maybe she wanted to talk, but every time I said, "Hey, Elaine," she'd just nod slowly, then turn and walk away. It all started to feel wrong around mid-October. That's when things went from weird old lady to something is wrong and I don't know how to fix it. One night around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of tapping, not knocking, tapping, soft and steady, just above a whisper. I sat up, heart pounding, and realized it was coming from my bedroom door. I froze. I didn't say anything at first. I waited. The tapping kept going, rhythmically, like a child playing a game. I finally whispered, "Elaine?" The tapping stopped. Silence. Then, clear as day, I heard that same high-pitched giggle from the other side of the door. My blood ran cold. I didn't move for what felt like hours. I couldn't. The worst part? My door didn't have a lock. The next morning, I tried to talk to her. I waited until I heard her in the kitchen, went out and said, as casually as I could, "Hey, were you up late last night?" She looked up from her tea. "Oh? No, dear. I went to bed around 9. I nodded slowly, trying to keep my face neutral. I thought I heard tapping on my door. She smiled, wide and slow. "Dreams can be very loud, can't they?" That was the last time I tried to confront her. That night I pushed my desk in front of the door, just in case. I didn't want to take chances, not anymore. At 3:12 a.m., I woke up to the door handle rattling, not tapping, not knocking. This time someone was trying to open the door. I stayed still. I could see the desk shifting slightly with each push. Then it stopped. I thought maybe she'd gone back to bed. And then I saw it. An eye, pressed to the thin sliver of space between the door and the frame. She was watching me, through the crack, just watching. And then she screamed. It was sudden and sharp, like someone being burned. She screamed my name, screamed nonsense, "You shouldn't be here," and started slamming against the door. The desk thudded forward with each hit. I jumped out of bed and threw myself against it, yelling at her to stop. She kept screaming. Then, silence. When I finally called the police, I didn't even know what to say. I just said there was a woman in my house trying to break down my bedroom door. They arrived 10 minutes later. When I opened the door, I almost vomited. Every single knife from our kitchen drawer had been stabbed into the door, some buried deep, others barely hanging. My door looked like a pincushion made of steel. Elaine didn't come out of her room at first. One of the officers knocked gently. The other held my arm as I explained everything. Her watching, the giggling, the screaming. She didn't go quietly. They had to restrain her. She screamed as they took her out, about demons and voices and blood in the walls. She didn't look at me. The next month, I moved into a different apartment across town, this time with 2 other students. We split rent 3 ways, and though the place was smaller, I never felt safer. I never saw Elaine again. I later learned from the officer who followed up that she had no next of kin, no medical records. The name on her ID wasn't even real. There was no Elaine Barrett in any public registry for this state. The landlord said she'd replied to his Craigslist ad too, paid in cash. I still don't know who she was, or what she wanted, but I'll never forget the way her eye looked through that crack in the door. Like she wasn't just watching me, like she was waiting. In the beginning, it was just a creak, something you'd expect in a terraced house that had stood since the late 1800s. Barrowfield was the kind of town people forgot existed. Rows and rows of red brick homes hugging tight, their back gardens separated by leaning fences and rusting sheds. Old chimneys, uneven windows, and in the middle of it all, 27 Bridgewater Lane, where I lived for 3 years. I had moved in after a breakup, craving space, peace, and frankly cheap rent. The 2-bedroom terrace was small but cozy, with old carpet, a fireplace that didn't work, and a damp patch near the front window that never quite dried. Still, it was mine. My name is Grace Holloway. I was 28 when it happened. I worked in admin at a local medical supply company, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. Nothing dramatic. My dog, a black Labrador named Luna, was my closest companion. My social circle had thinned out after the breakup, but I didn't mind the quiet. For the most part, Bridgewater Lane was just that. Quiet. Old people, young couples, and a few single tenants like me. Except for the man next door. That was Robert. He lived at 29. Mid-40s, balding, wore old knit cardigans even in the summer. Never saw him with visitors. Didn't work as far as I could tell. He'd sit on his front step sometimes, rolling cigarettes with yellowed fingers and watching people walk by. Not in a curious way. In a recording everything kind of way. We'd nod in passing. I never felt comfortable enough to have a full conversation. It wasn't just his appearance. It was the way his eyes lingered too long. The way he'd smile when he thought no one was looking. The first month passed uneventfully, but around week 5, I started hearing things. It began in the bathroom. The ceiling above the tub creaked sometimes. Nothing dramatic, just an occasional thump or soft scuffle like something small shifting. I figured it was an animal, maybe a squirrel, or birds that had found a way under the roof tiles. The house had a hatch for the attic just outside the bathroom. I'd only ever peeked up there once when I moved in. Just dusty beams, insulation, and forgotten pipes. I'd never had a reason to go back. I remember clearly one night. I was soaking in the tub after a long shift, candles lit, Luna curled outside the door, and I heard it again. Soft movement above me. The ceiling gave a faint creak, then silence. Luna let out a low growl. I sat up, heart thudding. Probably just a pigeon or something, I muttered. Still, I asked my friend Adam to come check the attic for me that weekend. He brought a torch, climbed halfway up the ladder, and shone the light around. Nothing up there, Grace. Just cobwebs and regret, he joked. I laughed. He climbed down. I didn't think about it again until weeks later. It was a Friday night in early autumn. I'd planned to meet friends at the pub for someone's birthday, but I was running late. I'd just gotten out of the shower, towel drying my hair when Luna started barking, loud, sharp, desperate. I ran out of the bathroom to find her in the hallway, tail stiff, eyes locked upward. She was staring at the ceiling, exactly above the bathroom. "Luna, what's wrong?" I asked, my voice tight. She didn't move. Then I heard it. Just a faint scrape above my head, like something being dragged slowly. Not an animal. Too slow, too intentional. I froze. My breath caught. It was like someone was crawling, deliberately shifting their weight beam by beam. "Shit," I whispered, grabbing my phone. I wasn't staying. I got dressed fast, called a friend, and said I'd get ready at her place instead. I whispered the whole call, feeling silly but scared. I left the house quickly, Luna pulling me down the path. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I didn't sleep well. The next morning, I was standing outside watering the front garden, trying to act normal, when Robert called out. "You all right?" he asked. I turned. He stood on his doorstep with his usual expressionless face. "Yeah, thanks," I said, forcing a smile. I went back to watering. Just as I turned to go inside, he said, "Did you make it to your friend's place in time?" I paused, blinked. "Sorry." "Last night. I heard you say you were getting ready at her place." I hadn't said that out loud, not near the window, not outside. I'd whispered it while standing in the hallway, far from any shared wall. My stomach dropped. "Oh, yeah, I did. Thanks." I mumbled and went inside, locking the door behind me. It hit me in waves. How could he have known? The only explanation was that he'd heard me from inside the house. My skin went cold. I called my dad. An hour later, my dad, uncle, and cousin arrived. We didn't want to confront anyone. Not yet. We just needed answers. We turned on only the bathroom light, leaving the rest of the upstairs in darkness. Then we opened the attic hatch. At first, nothing. But then I noticed it. 2 tiny pinholes in the bathroom ceiling, positioned just above the tub. Not visible unless you were standing directly under them. We killed the bathroom light. The attic above us stayed dark, except for 2 pinpoints of light shining downward, like eyes. My cousin went up first. It was quiet for a while. Then he came down and said quietly, "The wall between your attic and next door, it's busted. Bricks knocked in. Most of them are on your side." My dad's face darkened. He walked straight outside, across the path, and began banging on Robert's door. "Open up, you coward," he yelled. "Open the damn door." But Robert wasn't home, or wasn't answering. We called the police. They came, asked questions, did a walkthrough of the attic. Robert told them he'd never gone up there. Blamed the damage on the previous tenants. "There's no proof," one officer said to us privately. "We can't arrest someone for noises." But it was more than that. Robert knew things he shouldn't. There were holes in my ceiling. Someone had been watching me, maybe for weeks, and the wall between our homes had been broken from his side. Nothing ever came of the report. But I didn't sleep in that house again. I moved back in with my parents that week, returned later to gather my things during the day, never alone. I never saw Robert again. He moved out 6 months later. The letting agent said the property had unexpected water damage in the attic and wasn't suitable for tenants anymore. Years later, I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't left that night. If I'd stayed in the bath just a little longer. If Luna hadn't barked. If I hadn't whispered. If I hadn't listened to my gut. Sometimes I dream about creaking floorboards and dark holes above my head. And sometimes I wake up and check the ceiling, just to be sure. Because even now, in a new house, in a new town, I never look at the attic the same way. I never expected moving to another country would teach me what fear tastes like. I was 20 when I got my acceptance letter to study psychology at Newley University. I remember running around my small room back home in India, phone shaking in my hands, texting my best friend in all caps. It wasn't just about the degree, it was freedom. Things at home were tense, arguments a daily ritual between my parents that I could never mute, no matter how loud my headphones were. I needed out. Newley wasn't London or Manchester. It was a quieter university town with ivy-covered buildings, buses that always ran late, and rows of red brick houses that reminded me of some BBC show. My first year was everything I'd dreamed of. I stayed in student halls, tiny rooms with shared kitchens that always smelled like burnt toast and instant noodles. That's where I met Chloe, Zoe, and Matt. We clicked quickly. Nights out, kitchen dance parties, crying over assignments. It felt like family, but better. By the time second year came around, we were ready to move into our own house. Not a flat with paper-thin walls and weird rules, an actual 2-story house rented through student accommodation services. Our place sat at the end of a terraced row on a street called Ashcroft Lane. We had a little backyard, a rickety wooden gate that opened onto a narrow alleyway, and a corner shop just 5 minutes away. My room was on the ground floor, window facing the backyard. It was small, but I liked it. I could smoke out the window and watch squirrels dance on the brick walls. We had neighbors on both sides. The ones on the left were a quiet family, an older couple who only ever waved politely. The ones on the right, though, were different. 5 guys, loud, drunk half the time. Their music bled through the walls on weekends. Sometimes we saw them shirtless in the alley, smoking and laughing too loud. One of them, the tallest, with a buzz cut and hollow eyes, always stared a bit too long when we walked past. We later found out his name was Kieran. Things got bad 3 months into term. It started with sirens. One evening, around 8 p.m., we heard screaming from the house next door. Real screaming. Not the drunk kind, the gut-wrenching kind that cuts through walls. We froze. Then came the sound of glass smashing, then a loud bang. Chloe called the police while I stood by the front door, heart hammering. Minutes later, flashing blue lights lit up our living room. When I stepped outside, the scene looked like something from a true crime show. One of the men from the house next door, maybe 25, covered in blood, shirt ripped open, was sitting on the pavement, gashes on his arm, a bruise blooming across his temple. Another guy was being loaded into the back of a police van, hands cuffed, shouting nonsense. The injured man looked dazed, like he didn't even feel the pain. We gave him an old towel, some water. Matt lent him a shirt. He kept saying weird things like, "It's all her fault," and "He hears voices in the fridge." His words didn't make much sense, and then he turned to me, really turned, and smiled. "You've got kind eyes," he said, tilting his head. "That's rare around here." I smiled politely, but I was creeped out. I backed away, letting the police handle it. We thought that was the end. It wasn't. I started seeing Kieran more often after that night. In the street, outside the shop. Once, while waiting for the bus, I saw him across the road, staring like he'd been waiting. He never said anything, just looked. I kept telling myself it was nothing. I mean, he lived next door. Of course, we'd bump into each other. Then one afternoon, I was walking to the shop for a bottle of Coke. He came out of nowhere, falling into step beside me. He smiled like we were old friends. "Hey, you all right?" "Yeah," "Thanks," I said, keeping my voice even. "Good," he said. Then after a pause, "We should talk sometime. Just us." "I'm kind of busy," I mumbled. He stopped walking. I kept going. "That's all right," he called after me. "I'll wait by your house. We can talk when you're back." I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking. But when I rounded the corner with my drink in hand, there he was, actually waiting. And not alone. He had one of his flatmates with him, sitting on our doorstep like it was theirs. I didn't go back. I turned around and walked straight back to the shop, my legs suddenly weak. I called Matt in a panic. He was the only guy living with us. But of course, he wasn't home. No one was. I waited near the shop for an hour, checking my phone every 5 minutes. They finally left. I sprinted home and locked every bolt on the front door. From the glass panel, I could still see the smudge of someone's handprint. Things got quieter for a while. I stopped going out much, took longer routes to uni. Daniel, my boyfriend, started staying over more. He lived in halls on the other side of campus, but he didn't mind the travel. I never told him everything, not then. Just said the neighbors were weird. Then came the night that still makes my skin crawl. Daniel was over. We'd watched a film, ordered takeaway, passed out around 1 a.m. The room was warm, so I'd left the window cracked open like always. At around 3 a.m., I felt Daniel shift beside me. Then he sat up. "Ellie," he whispered, "wake up." I blinked at him in the dark. He put a hand over my mouth gently and nodded toward the window. We stayed still. Outside in the backyard, we heard footsteps. Slow, crunching steps on the gravel. Then a low whisper, indistinct. Then, bang. The wooden gate slammed open. I remembered we'd tied it like always. That sound wasn't just the wind. My heart thudded. We listened. Then came the soft sound of the back door handle rattling. Someone was trying to open it, gently, like they were testing it. We didn't move. Curtains drawn. Lights off. Then the unmistakable creak of my window sliding open further. I hadn't touched it. Daniel jumped up, pulled me with him. We grabbed our phones, threw on whatever clothes we could, and sprinted out of the room. I nearly tripped on the stairs. We bolted out the front door barefoot. I didn't care if I cut my feet open, I just wanted out. I called the police while Daniel called Matt. Officers were there in minutes. The station was nearby, thank God. They searched the yard, found a guy crouched behind the bins. It wasn't Kieran, it was one of the other guys. They caught him. Kieran was found 2 streets over, trying to pretend like he'd just been on a walk. They didn't say much, just took statements. Told us to keep our doors locked. Said it was probably just drunken stupidity. I don't think drunks usually cut through tied strings on locked gates. I don't think drunks whisper in the dark and open people's windows. After that, I couldn't sleep properly. I'd wake up sweating at 2 a.m., imagining sounds outside the window. I stopped going into the backyard, even kept the curtains drawn during the day. My coursework suffered. I kept picturing what could have happened if Daniel hadn't woken up, if we hadn't run, if the door had been left unlocked. A few months later, I packed up early and moved back home. Told everyone I just missed my family. But the truth was, I couldn't stand that house anymore. Couldn't stand Ashcroft Lane. Couldn't even hear footsteps behind me without feeling like I was being followed. Sometimes I still dream about it. The whispering, the rattle of the door handle, the way the window moved on its own. And the worst part? No one ever told me why. I never said anything to them. Never even looked at them funny. But still, for some reason, they tried to come in, and I'll never know what they wanted, or what might have happened if I hadn't tied that gate tighter, or if Daniel hadn't woken up. When I was 10 years old, life felt vast and quiet, too quiet for my liking. Our house sat on the edge of a sleepy town in western Pennsylvania, nestled between rolling hills and endless stretches of woods. The nearest neighbor was more than half a mile away, And every day walking home from school meant crossing that lonely stretch of road, lined by thick trees and the occasional rundown house. My name is Emily Saunders. Back then, I lived with my mom and dad in that creaky old farmhouse at the end of Maple Hollow Road. It was the kind of place where you could hear the wind whistle through the cracks in the windows and the distant hoot of an owl at night. Peaceful, some would say. But for me, that peace was always shadowed by one uneasy presence. The house right next to ours belonged to a man named Mr. Grayson. I barely knew his first name, and honestly, I never wanted to. He was old, older than my grandparents, and something about him made my skin crawl every time I saw him. The windows of his house were painted over with layers of white spray paint, making it impossible to see inside. His yard was a jungle of weeds and dead branches, untouched for months. But the creepiest thing was how he always seemed to be watching. The walk home. Every weekday, after the final bell rang at Miller Elementary, I'd trek the 2-mile walk back home. Most kids got rides or buses, but my parents liked me to walk, said it was good to be independent, to feel the air on your face. I liked it too, mostly, but the 5 minutes I had to pass Mr. Grayson's house were the worst part of the day. "Hey, Emily," he'd call out, his voice rough and low from the porch. It wasn't a friendly greeting, it was cold, calculated. I'd try to hurry past, clutching my backpack straps tight and not making eye contact. But sometimes he'd take a step closer, maybe try to ask me questions about school or what I was doing after class. "Where you going? You don't want to stop and say hi?" I'd shake my head and quicken my pace, my heart pounding so hard I thought he'd hear it. One afternoon, I remember nearly tripping over a root in the cracked sidewalk because my eyes were glued to the grimy windows of his house, half expecting him to be standing there watching me. At dinner that night, I kept thinking about Mr. Grayson. I wanted to tell my mom or dad, but something stopped me. What if they thought I was making it up? What if they told me to just ignore him like everyone else seemed to do? So I stayed quiet. You're awfully quiet," Mom said, pushing peas around her plate. "Something wrong at school?" I shook my head, forcing a smile. "No, just tired." Dad glanced up from his steak. "If that guy next door bothers you again, you let us know, okay?" I nodded, but inside I felt a knot growing. Weeks passed and my dread grew. Sometimes at night, I'd catch a flicker of light through the thin curtains of my bedroom window. I knew that flashlight all too well. It was him. One night I woke suddenly, the beam cutting through the dark like a knife. My breath hitched, frozen in place. I couldn't see his face clearly, but the way he moved, slow, deliberate, made my stomach turn. I pulled the blankets tighter around me and told myself he couldn't see much. My window was on the 2nd floor after all. But I couldn't sleep. Then came the summer night that changed everything. I was lying in bed, the fan humming softly, when the light returned, brighter this time and accompanied by a soft thud against the side of the house. My heart stopped. I recognized the sound. It was the ladder. I had seen it before, leaned against the side of Mr. Grayson's porch in the daytime. But at night, it wasn't just a ladder. It was a threat. A sharp knocking sounded on the glass next to my head. I turned slowly, and there he was, his face inches from the window, a twisted smile curling his lips, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the pane as if inviting me to open it. I screamed and bolted from my room, rushing to my parents' bedroom. "Mom, Dad, he's at my window." They hurried to my room, flashlights in hand, but the yard was empty. No sign of Mr. Grayson or the ladder. "Are you sure it wasn't a dream?" Dad asked softly, trying to calm me down. "It wasn't," I insisted. "He was there. I saw him. He wanted me to open the window." Mom put an arm around me, but her eyes flickered with doubt. "Sweetie, sometimes your imagination can make things seem real when they're not." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But deep down, I knew the truth. That summer, Mr. Grayson's house suddenly went up for sale. The creepy windows stayed painted, but the man himself vanished. I never saw him again. After the night at the window, things at home got quieter, but I never forgot that feeling. The way his eyes seemed to pierce right through the glass. The way his smile didn't reach his eyes. I started locking my bedroom window every night, double checking it before I went to bed, even when my parents said it wasn't necessary. School days felt heavier too. Every time I passed the empty house, I'd look at the for sale sign stuck in the wild grass out front and wonder where he had gone. Was he really gone? Or was he watching from somewhere else? Mom and Dad never talked about it. I wanted to tell them everything. The flashlight, the ladder, the knocking. But I was scared they'd think I was crazy or exaggerating. So I buried it deep inside. New neighbors eventually moved into Mr. Grayson's old house. A young family with kids about my age. They painted the windows clean and cut back the overgrown bushes. The yard smelled fresh with new life. The house didn't feel eerie anymore. One afternoon, I watched the children playing across the road. I felt a strange mix of relief and guilt. Relief that my nightmare neighbor was gone. Guilt because I had never told anyone what really happened. One evening, months later, I found Mom sitting alone on the porch swing, staring at the stars. "Mom," I said quietly, sitting beside her. "Remember that creepy man who lived next door?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, honey, that was hard for all of us." "I never told you everything," I admitted. "I was scared you wouldn't believe me." She smiled sadly. "Sometimes grown-ups don't understand things kids see or feel. But I believe you, Emily. I'm sorry we didn't protect you better." Her words made something inside me ease, a small comfort after all the fear. Years later, I still think about that summer and the man who watched me from behind spray-painted windows. The experience shaped how I see the world, made me cautious, made me trust my instincts. But it also taught me this. Sometimes danger isn't loud or obvious. Sometimes it hides quietly in the spaces between the houses, in the silence of a dark night. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is speak up, even if you're afraid no one will listen. I never imagined I'd leave the city for good. Not really. My husband and I used to talk about it in that dreamy, someday kind of way, when the kids were older, when the timing felt right, when work slowed down. But last fall it just clicked. The apartment above us flooded for the second time in 6 months. The landlord didn't seem to care. Our twins were getting sick from the mold. The neighbor downstairs kept screaming at her boyfriend at 2 a.m., and there was a shooting a few blocks away. One night over takeout, I looked at Lucas and said, "What if we just left?" And for once, he didn't brush it off. 3 months later, we closed on a modest farmhouse outside a little place called Juniper Hollow, population 612. It wasn't much, white siding, wraparound porch, creaky floors, but it sat on 5 acres of open land, the kind that breathes. No sirens, no traffic, just wind through the grass and a tree line in the distance. It felt like a place you could raise kids and grow old together. The town was about 40 minutes from anything resembling a city. Just one diner, a gas station, and a feed store. The kind of place where folks wave as they pass, whether they know you or not. For the first few weeks, it was peaceful. The boys played outside until dusk. I spent mornings in the garden. We repainted the living room and hung our wedding photos by the stairs. It started to feel like home. Then I met Harold. It was a crisp March morning. The frost was just lifting, and I was walking back from the mailbox when I saw him across the road, kneeling in his yard, trimming the edges of his flower beds with a pair of shears. He stood when he saw me. Tall, wiry, with thick silver hair slicked back, and a face that should have belonged to someone 20 years younger. "Morning," he called out. "Good morning," I replied, waving. "You must be the city folks bought the Miller place." "That's us," I smiled. "I'm Claire." "Harold," he said, crossing the gravel road with long strides. "Been out here my whole life. A lot of folks around here are family, more or less. My daughter's just down there. He gestured to the left. "And my nephew's right next to you." He shook my hand, his grip firm. His eyes were a piercing blue, sharp and alert. I found myself wondering how old he was. Late 50s, early 60s. Later, Lucas told me Harold was 82. That was the first thing that didn't quite sit right. Harold was friendly, but not in a warm way. More like a boss checking in on his employees. A few days after we met, he came by again, this time in the morning while I was out weeding near the barn. "Just so you know," he said like he was doing me a favor, "you ought to mow the yard every 5 days. Keep the place from looking wild." I blinked at him. "Oh, well, the front yard sure, but the backfield's hay. We're planning on letting it grow for a late spring cut." He stared at me for a moment, then smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. Still, best to keep things neat. Then he paused like he was choosing his next words carefully. "If there's anything you need," he said, "you ought to send your husband over. Or call my wife. Best not to talk directly to me." I laughed, confused. "You mean if we need tools or something?" "Just in general." Then he looked me up and down. Not in a sexual way, but something else. Clinical. Calculating. "You'd look more motherly if you grew your hair out." I felt my cheeks burn. "Excuse me?" He was already walking away. I told Lucas about it that night. He brushed it off with a shrug. Small town quirks. Probably thinks he's being neighborly. I wanted to believe that. I really did. About a week later, Harold's daughter Maggie invited me over for tea. She was polite and soft-spoken, always tending to her garden out front. I thought maybe I'd misread the situation. Maybe this was just how things were around here. Blunt, old-fashioned, a little off-kilter. Her house was cozy, filled with plants and doilies and the smell of cinnamon. We sat in her kitchen, sipping tea and chatting about the weather and school districts. She spoke with practiced ease, but something about her smile felt rehearsed. Halfway through our conversation, her phone rang. "Sorry, one sec," she said, excusing herself. I sat alone for a minute, then two. Her house was eerily quiet. I stood to stretch, just enough to glance down the hallway. At the end of it was a door. Unlike the rest of the house, which was homey and worn, this door was pristine, reinforced, out of place. There were 3 deadbolts stacked vertically. The paint was newer. Around the frame, deep scratches marred the wood, like something had tried to claw its way out. I took a slow step forward. "Just storage," Maggie's voice rang behind me too brightly. I turned. She was standing in the hallway now, smiling too much. "Old root cellar, not really safe down there." She ushered me back to the kitchen. I didn't ask any more questions. That night I walked past Maggie's house on the way to the mailbox. Just a glance. That was all it took. One of the basement windows, small, rectangular, barely above ground, had a handprint on it. Not just a smudge, a full, pressed hand. Small, child-sized, fresh. I told Lucas. He said it was probably from cleaning or one of her grandkids, but it hadn't rained. There was no dirt or streaking, just the hand, as if someone had leaned into the glass and stayed there a while. A few nights later, we woke up to the boys crying. There were tire tracks through our field, leading to the barn. No one admitted to being there. Lucas checked our outdoor cameras. The footage was gone, not corrupted, erased, just missing. He replaced the SD card and set up backups. The final straw came on a warm, windy afternoon. I was hanging laundry on the line when I felt it. Eyes. That unmistakable prickling down your neck when someone's watching. I turned. Harold was standing at the edge of our property. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just stared. Then finally, he lifted a hand and pointed to the tree line. "Don't dig there," he said. Then turned and walked away. I hadn't planned to dig, not until he said that. The next afternoon, after Lucas left for town and the kids were napping, I took a shovel and headed for the spot he'd pointed at. The ground was soft, slightly sunken. I dug. 6 inches down, I hit something solid, a rusted metal box. I dragged it out, heart hammering, and pried it open. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, curled and brittle with age, black and white. Every photo was of a family standing in front of our house, couples, children, babies, spanning decades. In every photo, just off to the side, there he was, Harold, unchanged. I stared at them for what felt like hours. My hands trembled as I gathered them up. I needed answers. I marched across the road to his house and knocked. It wasn't Harold who answered. It was his wife, small, quiet, gray-haired. I asked to speak to him. Her face changed. "You must be mistaken," she said softly. "Harold passed away nearly 3 years ago." I stepped back. "But he was just here," I whispered. She shook her head slowly. "I'm sorry. That's not possible." I left in a daze. Back at home, I looked through the photos again. One had a date scribbled on the back, 1979. Another, 1954. Different families. Same house, same man, same Harold. I went online that night, found archived records. The house had changed hands over a dozen times in the last 60 years. None of the families stayed longer than a few years. Most vanished without selling. One, according to a newspaper clipping, was presumed missing. I showed Lucas everything. He didn't sleep that night. Neither did I. We tried to move a week later. The U-Haul wouldn't start. The spare truck overheated. Our internet cut out. When I called for help, the sheriff came by and said, "Some places don't like being left behind." He smiled, just like Harold. That night, someone knocked on our door at 3:12 a.m. Lucas checked. No one was there. But on the porch, a fresh photo. United States, standing in front of the house. Harold just off to the side, smiling. It started with scratches. At first, I thought it was something stupid. Maybe a delivery guy carrying a box with nails sticking out, or some kid dragging their scooter too close to the door. But deep down, even in that first moment, I think my body understood before my brain did. This wasn't random. This was intentional. Let me back up. My name's Isla Bennett. I'm 24, and I was living just outside Charlotte, North Carolina, in a quiet suburban apartment complex called Wellington Hills. I'd been there for nearly a year with my best friend and roommate, Maya Green. She's 23, sharp as hell, with a mouth that never learned to whisper, and the kind of laugh that always makes strangers look twice, whether from annoyance or envy, who knows. We moved to Wellington Hills to get away from the chaos in the city. Rising crime, noise, overpriced rent. Our apartment was small but cozy, 3rd floor, Building C, Unit 305. 2 bedrooms, laminate wood floors, and a balcony that overlooked the parking lot and some sad-looking pines. It wasn't glamorous, but it was safe. Or at least, it felt that way. We installed a Ring peephole cam on the door and a digital keypad lock, mostly because Maya was paranoid. Her older brother's a cop, so she's always on edge about security. I used to tease her about it. I don't anymore. Everything was fine for the first several months. We had neighbors we barely saw but exchanged polite nods with in passing, mostly working professionals and a few small families. The couple directly across the hall, the Petersons, were nice. They had a toddler who screamed constantly, but they kept to themselves and brought over banana bread once. Then, in February, they moved out. The unit across from us sat empty for about 10 days. We assumed it'd be a while before it was filled. The property manager was slow to update listings and picky about background checks. We'd seen them turn people away before, so when we saw a moving truck out front one morning in early March, we were surprised. The new tenant moved in alone. Mid-30s, maybe older, thin building, pale, always in long sleeves even when it was warm. We never caught his name. He didn't greet us, didn't wave, didn't look at us. The most we ever got was the faint sound of his keys jingling or the lock turning behind him. His apartment stayed dark most of the time, even during the day. Maybe he's a night shift worker, Maya said. Some nurse or warehouse guy or something. Then why does it sound like he's dragging furniture at 2 a.m. every night? I shot back. The first time we heard it, we were watching a movie. The scraping sound came in low and slow, like something heavy being pulled across hardwood. We paused the TV, looked at each other, waited. Then footsteps, measured, deliberate, pacing. Then it stopped. We didn't think much of it. Could have been cleaning, rearranging furniture. We told ourselves it was normal. It wasn't. Over the next few weeks, the sounds became consistent. Always after midnight, sometimes 2 a.m., sometimes closer to 4. Sometimes we heard muttering, low and fast, like he was arguing with someone, or himself. Still, we didn't say anything. What would we even say? "Hi, excuse us. Could you maybe stop pacing like a serial killer every night?" Then came the hallway incident. It was a Thursday. I had a late shift at work and came home around midnight. Maya had come home earlier and was already in bed. When she got up to grab water around 1:30, she saw him standing directly in front of our door, not moving, not knocking, not doing anything, just standing. She froze. "Hi," she said cautiously. No response. He didn't flinch, didn't even look at her, just turned, slowly, and walked back to his apartment. She told me in the morning, trying to laugh it off, but her voice was tight and forced. I checked the ring footage. There he was, standing there for nearly 4 minutes, staring at the peephole, not blinking. That's when the ring alert started. Late night motion detected, between 1 and 3 a.m. every time, sometimes twice a night. Each clip showed the same thing, him walking past our door slowly. Sometimes he stopped and stood there. Sometimes he reached out and touched the doorknob. Once we caught him bending down and speaking, into the keyhole. We muted the audio and listened. It was whispering, raspy and broken. Maya started sleeping with pepper spray under her pillow. I kept a metal baseball bat next to the bed. Then came the scratches. Deep, angry gashes on the front door, like someone had taken a key or something sharper and dragged it in wide arcs across the paint. Not once, not twice, but over and over, until the wood beneath was exposed. We reported it to the leasing office. They nodded politely, said they'd make a note of it, and promised to check the hallway camera. That was 2 days before we found out it hadn't been working for months. I told them we had ring footage. They asked if he actually did anything illegal. We showed the videos. They said, "Let us know if anything else happens." I remember Maya slamming the door when we got home. "They won't help us until he stabs one of us through the mail slot." We started taking extra precautions. Locked the door twice. Kept a chair wedged under the knob. Left the hallway light on at night. We even moved a dresser in front of our shared bedroom door, just in case. Then came the night. It was a Tuesday, 1:37 a.m. I remember because I'd just finished a video call with my sister. We were both up late, trading horror stories about college exes. Maya had dozed off on the couch next to me. Then, bang, bang, bang. I jumped up. Maya jolted awake. The door was shaking in its frame. I grabbed my phone, my hands already slick with sweat, and opened the Ring app. He was there, shirtless, eyes wide and red-rimmed. He was pressed against the peephole, staring through it. And then, he whispered. We couldn't make it out, but it was deliberate, like he was talking to us, directly, slowly. Then suddenly, he screamed, not a yell, a shriek, a horrible animalistic sound that made my stomach twist. I called 911. The dispatcher's voice was calm, like she'd done this 100 times before. She told us to hide, stay quiet, don't engage. We huddled behind the dresser, pressed into the corner of the bedroom, Maya clutching her pepper spray and crying quietly. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The banging stopped. The police arrived 34 minutes after I made the call. By the time they got there, it was silent. He didn't answer his door. They knocked. They even tried the handle. But unless they had a warrant or saw a weapon, there wasn't much they could do. "He's clearly unstable," I said. "Maybe," one of them replied. "But he didn't technically break the law tonight." That was it. Maya didn't say a word when the officers left. She just walked into her room and started pulling her suitcase from under the bed. We packed that morning. Didn't wait for daylight. Didn't wait for the lease to end. We drove straight to Maya's aunt's house 2 towns over and filed another police report from there. Not that it mattered. Nothing ever came of it. The leasing office said they'd look into it, but the apartment stayed occupied for months. We never heard anything more. No charges, no follow-up, nothing. We never found out his name, never learned what he wanted, never understood why us. But here's what I know. We chose to leave. We didn't wait to become a news headline. We didn't second-guess our fear. We didn't write it off as just weird. We listened to our gut. And maybe, just maybe, that choice saved our lives. I never planned to move back to my hometown, but after a rough breakup and a draining job that finally chewed me up and spat me out, I needed a reset. My parents had moved to Arizona last fall and left the house to me. I grew up here, this creaky old ranch-style place tucked between 2 quiet streets on the edge of Elmridge, Indiana. I'd forgotten how quiet the town could be at night. Too quiet sometimes. It was late June, the kind of summer night where the air felt thick enough to chew, and I was settling into the basement office I'd made out of the old rec room. I was doing some light sanding on a drywall patch job. The basement had always needed work, and I figured if I was going to start fresh, the place might as well look fresh too. The thing is, I'd always loved the basement. It was cool, even in the summer, and gave me a weird sense of privacy. Peace. But that night, peace wasn't the word I'd use for what followed. Let me back up a bit first. I'm Ian Hargrove, 28, born and raised in Elmridge. After college and a few weird years bouncing between cities, I found myself back here, alone in the same house I used to beg my parents to let me sneak out of. Most of my friends have long since moved on, some to Chicago, others who just faded out of touch. But one thing about small towns is that the old folks never leave. Like Mrs. Evelyn Kane, my next-door neighbor. Mid-70s, sharp as a tack, a little eccentric, and known for being nosy in a way that somehow made you feel more protected than annoyed. Her porch light is always on, and she's always out there after sundown, usually sipping tea, knitting something, or just watching. I can't tell you how many times she's texted me about suspicious cars or cats sneaking into my trash cans. So when she texted me that night, around 12:08 a.m., I wasn't exactly alarmed. Mrs. Kane. "Hey, honey, just saw a tall guy walk into your basement. Wanted to let you know." At first, I didn't even look away from my monitor. I was mid-game, headset on, totally immersed. I texted back with one hand. "Me. Are you sure?" "Pretty sure I'd notice." Mrs. Kane. "Yup. He ducked under your doorframe. Real tall. Thought maybe you had a friend over?" I paused. "Friend?" I'd been completely alone all evening. The door to the basement is outside, at the back of the house near the camper I never use, but it never shuts right. It's slow, creaky, and needs to be latched manually from the outside. But I hadn't heard a thing. I muted my headset and spun around in my chair. The lights were on, music low in the background. The air smelled faintly of drywall dust. No doors opened, no shadows moved. My tools were exactly where I left them. I walked to the foot of the basement stairs and stood there listening. Nothing. Not a footstep, not a whisper. I texted her again. "Me. I'm down here now, alone. Are you totally sure?" She didn't reply right away. I went back to my desk, chalked it up to a trick of the light, or maybe she mistook someone walking past for something else. But at 12:42 a.m., she messaged me again. "Mrs. Kane. He just left." Me. "Left? From where?" "Mrs. Kane. From your basement. Walked out and down toward your camper." I tried to follow with my flashlight, but he never came out the other side. He just didn't. That gave me pause. There's no place to disappear back there. My camper sits beside a chain-link fence. Beyond it is just overgrowth and a slope leading down toward the dried-up creek bed. You'd have to either hop the fence or come back around the house. There's nowhere to go. I got up and started walking around the basement. Slowly. Every step echoed. My Crocs made those familiar squeaky footfalls on the concrete floor, and I could see the dusty trails I'd left while doing drywall work. There were no extra footprints, no smudges, no signs anyone else had been down there. At this point, I was a little freaked out, but trying not to let it show. I'm not easily spooked. I grew up in this house. I know its sounds, its smells, its drafts. Still, something about what she said, it scratched at something deeper. I decided to go talk to her face to face. Maybe just standing on her porch, sipping lemonade or whatever she was drinking would ease my nerves. I grabbed the door handle, gave it a pull. It didn't budge. The door wouldn't open. That didn't make sense. Like I said, this door doesn't shut on its own. It closes slow as molasses and only latches if you slide the bolt on the outside. I hadn't even closed it all the way when I came in earlier. And the padlock? Still on the shelf by my desk. I jiggled the handle again. Nothing. Now I was annoyed. I figured maybe the door had shifted with the weather. It happens sometimes in older homes. So I grabbed a flashlight and checked the windows. They're those narrow ones near the ceiling, meant more for light than escape. But I'd used them before when I locked myself out last winter. It was awkward, but doable. So I popped the screen, squeezed out, and walked around to the back. The door opened perfectly from the outside. No resistance. At this point, I was chalking it up to swelling wood or maybe the hinges catching. Still weird, but not impossible. I hopped my fence and went over to Evelyn's. She was sitting in her chair, porch light buzzing slightly above her. "You okay?" she asked as soon as I stepped onto the porch. "Yeah," I said. "Just, what exactly did you see?" She sipped from her mug, squinted at me. "Tall guy. All black. Moved real slow. Came up to your door. Stood there for a second like he was listening. Then let himself in." "Details?" I asked. She shook her head. Couldn't see his face. Shadowy, like he was wearing a hood or something. Seemed like he knew where he was going. I exhaled hard through my nose. Then, in typical Evelyn fashion, she smirked. "Was he cute?" I rolled my eyes. "Evelyn, seriously." She laughed. "Well, sorry. Just trying to lighten the mood." It was almost 1 a.m. now. The night felt thicker, heavier. I said goodnight, hopped the fence, and did a walkthrough of the house. Every room, every closet, every drawer. Nothing disturbed, everything locked, everything as it should be. I tend to pace when I'm thinking. Walked the upstairs halls, moved a dish or two, straightened a picture frame. Then, a loud bang from the basement, not like a door slam, not glass breaking, more like a shelf collapsing or wood splitting. I froze. Heart pounding, I grabbed the nearest thing with weight, an old brass lamp, and crept down the stairs. Everything was exactly the same. Even the tools I'd left were in perfect order. I stepped to the back door again, jammed, totally stuck, like before. Only this time, I noticed something. There was condensation on the inside of the door window, like breath had fogged it. Except, it hadn't been foggy earlier, and the temperature hadn't changed. I tried prying the door with a crowbar, pushing, pulling. Nothing worked. I reached for my phone. It wouldn't turn on. I hadn't touched it in over 2 hours, and it had been charging all day. It should have been nearly full, but it was dead. Totally lifeless. No Apple logo, no response, just black. I put it back on the charger and watched. No red charging symbol. Nothing. I sat there in silence. Eventually, after about an hour, it flickered to life. Battery, 1%. By the time it hit 50%, I tried the door again, and it opened instantly. No resistance. That was 5 nights ago. I haven't been back in the basement since. I don't know what Evelyn saw. I don't know why the door jammed like that, twice. and I really don't understand how my phone drained completely while sitting untouched. But I do know one thing. Something was in my house that night. Maybe someone. Maybe something else. And if Evelyn hadn't been watching from her porch, I might never have known. I was still frozen at the top of the stairs, staring at the now silent basement door. The same one that had jammed, then unjammed, then somehow refused to open from the inside. My phone sat heavy in my pocket, now at 62%, working perfectly again like nothing had ever happened. But something had happened, something I couldn't explain. I turned the deadbolt on the basement door without going back down. I didn't even look through the tiny window built into the frame. I just locked it, turned around and walked to the kitchen like a man pretending his house wasn't acting like a living thing. I texted Mrs. Barker, the neighbor, just one word. "Did you see anything else?" She didn't respond for a few minutes, and then her reply came, "He's not in your yard anymore." That should have made me feel better, but it didn't, because it meant there was someone. I decided I was going to sleep upstairs. I didn't care how hot it was. I shut off all the lights, grabbed a knife from the kitchen just in case, and locked myself in the spare bedroom. I didn't sleep much. I kept thinking I heard footsteps, soft and slow, creaking just beneath the floor. By morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains, golden and warm and normal. For a moment, I almost believed I'd just had some kind of hallucination. Maybe I had imagined everything. Stress, right? Anxiety, too much caffeine, too many creepy YouTube videos. Then I got another text. "Hey, just wanted to let you know, my camera picked up something weird around 3:10 a.m. Looks like someone walked out of your basement window. You want me to send the clip?" I called her instead of replying. She answered with a weird hesitation in her voice. "Hello? Yeah, send it. Right now." There was a pause. "You sure? You sound..." I said, "Send it, please." 2 minutes later, the video came through. I opened it. The camera showed the side of my house. Grainy, but clear enough. At 3:10 a.m., the basement window slid open. Slowly. From inside. And something did crawl out. It wasn't walking. It crawled low to the ground like it was trying not to be seen. Long limbs, awkward movements, too tall to fit out of that small window comfortably, but it somehow folded itself, like its bones were made of rubber. And then it stood. The thing that stood in my yard had the outline of a man, but its proportions were off. Too tall, arms too long, head too low, like it had no neck at all. It didn't look at the camera. It didn't look around. It just stood there for a full minute, motionless. And then it walked toward the back of my yard past my camper and vanished into the trees behind the fence. My heart was beating so hard I thought I might throw up. I called the police. I showed them the video and they did a full check of the basement. Nothing. No signs of forced entry. No footprints in the dust. Nothing stolen. But the window was unlocked. And my tools? One of them, a rusted crowbar I hadn't touched in years, was lying just beneath the window, half covered in old drywall dust, like it had been placed there. They told me they'd keep an eye on the area and said it was probably a squatter who got in while I was out. Maybe they'd been hiding in the crawl space. I could tell they didn't believe what the video actually showed. I didn't blame them. That night I couldn't sleep again. I moved a heavy dresser in front of the basement door. I locked every window twice. I even pulled the camper around to block the basement entrance from the outside. And still, around 2 a.m., I heard it. The faintest creak from beneath my feet, like someone walking, but slower this time. Deliberate. And then the sound of something tapping against the ceiling below me. Once, then twice, then silence. I never went back down into the basement. A week later, I rented a storage unit, packed up most of my tools, sealed up the window from the outside with metal flashing and bolts, and filled it with concrete from the inside. I paid a guy cash to finish the job. Told him it was for security reasons. Mrs. Barker moved a few weeks later, said she wanted to be closer to her daughter. I think she just wanted to be away from my yard. I don't blame her. I still live here. I still love my house. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear something moving under the floorboards. I tell myself it's just the house settling. But deep down I know better. I wasn't alone in the basement that night. And I don't think it ever left.